Most bankers aren't ready to help you until after their third cup of coffee. But with Central National Bank's after-hours service, you don't have to wait for the bank lobby to open to get help. You can contact us from 6 to 8:30 in the morning or from 5 to 10 in the evening, and we'll connect you to a real, live, local person who can answer questions and fix problems 7 days a week. Bank different. Bank Central. Central National Bank. Member FDIC.
Coming up on the Payoff, this guest has actually appeared on the Jimmy Kimmel show. Jimmy Fallon. He is terribly talented, and he is ridiculously credentialed. 37 years as a urologist. He's a urologist, folks. He's not an actor or a pop star. He is a urologist. His name is Dr. Dick Chopp, and he performs vasectomies. And more importantly, he's been sober for about 15 years. And this guy's got an unbelievable message, and he brings to the table, once again, the reminder that alcoholism is the great equalizer. We're talking about a guy who was at the top of his profession when he went to treatment for 3.5 months. And if you have somebody in your life that needs to stop drinking, pass this on to them if you want. And if you want to hear some great music, this is the artist for you. Southern California, well, Philadelphia's own, residing now in Southern California. His album is, I've seen clips of music videos for this guy's new album. It's coming, folks. Kevin Souza. Dr. Chopp.
How are you?
Oh, man, I'm great. How you doing?
Good.
First of all,
Okay.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
It is my pleasure, sir. It's my pleasure.
I think it's just always really cool to show people that this affects very successful people. It's the great equalizer. I always call it, alcoholism. And so it's really cool that you're able to kind of share your story and just kind of help break the stigma. You'd be surprised who has this stuff.
It goes across all levels of society.
Yeah.
And I'll touch on that a little bit as we go along. So, yeah.
I like to ask people, what's your sobriety date?
Yeah, my sobriety date is April 1st, 2007.
Okay.
And April Fool's Day, how appropriate. And, yeah. And, I think it's a great pleasure for me, Pete, to be able to talk with you and kind of share my experience in AA. It seems like forever ago, but it also seems like yesterday that, we were sitting in each other's seat wondering, how we got here and what we're going to do and, who's going to help us out and, are we going to end up going off the cliff? So fortunately, I've got a good sponsor here in Austin. His name is Charlie Parker. He doesn't mind me using his name. And before that, there's another gentleman that was a sponsor for a few years before I met Charlie. His name was Mark Houston, and he's one of the guys. Oh
gosh, I've heard of that guy.
Yeah, Mark Houston, and I think he's in the same league as Bill Wilson. This dude was a no BS guy, and
for people who don't know, I guess he's one of those guys, like a speaker circuit guy, that in the field of recovery, people really lean on his stuff, recordings, and you could YouTube Mark Houston and see some of his stuff.
Exactly. And then the bit of the good news is that we meet every Thursday night. Even with the pandemic, we did a lot of Zoom stuff. But for me, can't wait until we can get back to kind of live meetings, because for me it's more knee to knee. I think helps me get in tune with the rest of the guys.
I like how you say that, knee to knee.
Yeah,
because I talk about that too. I like the Zoom meetings and the smaller meetings, but the big rooms with people, they have a specific effect on me. And
no doubt about it.
I don't need to put it into words, but you know what I'm talking about. And if somebody is listening to this podcast and they struggle with alcoholism, we hope someday that they'll find out what that is too, because it's the feeling I now get the feeling from recovery that I used to get from drinking and using other drugs. I wanted to take you back a little bit in the time machine. Yep. Do you remember your first drink?
Oh yeah, no kidding. Yeah. I think one hears about alcoholics taking their first drink, and how freeing it was and how enabling it was. Everything was great. So I remember my first drink, and I think I was about 14 because I wasn't driving yet. And my buddy and I got hammered on lime flavored vodka of all the rot gut we could have found. And the next thing I knew, I'm on my hands and knees in the bathtub and turning inside out. And I told my dad, I remember telling him, I said, I must have had some really bad pizza. And he told me that he thought the pepperoni must have been 100 proof. And, I really didn't feel very empowered or very bulletproof at that point. And I didn't drink for a long time after that because that was no bueno for me at the time.
How old were you?
14.
Okay.
14.
And you mentioned your father. Is there alcoholism in your family?
Not my dad, but my mom, as it turns out, was an alcoholic. And it was manifest in her later in life, but and her brother was an alcoholic. So, there's probably some type of an alcohol gene thing. There's probably also the fact that if kids are exposed to more traumatic events when they're younger, which has happened in my case with my kids, of a divorce when they're growing up, some type of a traumatic event, it seems to make them more susceptible to alcoholism at an earlier age than if they had a more normal experience, if there is such a thing,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got to ask the question, are your children, are they in recovery? Are they?
I think one of the great things about my story is that when I got back from Talbot Recovery Center in Atlanta in July of 2007, I was back about 3 months and I ended up taking my daughter to Talbot 3 months later.
Wow.
And she's been sober and in good shape ever since. And if that isn't good enough, about 2.5 years ago, my son got in the ditch, and I ended up taking him to a recovery center in Colorado, and he is now helped running one of the recovery centers here in Austin. So, I mean, what could be a better thing than to have both your kids in recovery and one of them be actively working in it? So it's yeah. I mean,
this happened in my family. Both my brothers are sober and myself. My dad was a alcoholic, call him very functional. And my brother Michael got sober first, and he, sort of like it sounds like you did, just snapped off that branch of the family tree. Hopefully, right? And we communicate about it, snapping it in that sense. We talk about it. His daughter knows about his struggles, and I think there's something to be said for that. How the alcoholism can run through the family, but so can the recovery.
There's no doubt about that. Yeah, and my son, who's actively in recovery centers now, you could just see him bloom spiritually, and just his whole body language and the way he talks and everything is just, it makes me tingle whenever I'm around him. He's a great guy.
Well, you've certainly got quite a story, and so you go ahead and kind of tell me, and I'll just poke in. What exactly happened?
Yeah, well, I didn't do much drinking in high school except for that that lime flavored vodka.
Yeah, the 100 proof pepperoni.
Yeah, I know it. And I grew up in a little town in northern Minnesota, just 6,000 people. We're 80 miles from the Canadian border, and there was lots of hockey in the wintertime and snow, and lots of mosquitoes in the rest of the year. And Minnesota in those days was one of the states that had just a 3.2% beer limit, and you could drink a 6-pack of that stuff, and it gave you a headache, but it didn't give you much of a buzz, And it was great news if some of our buddies went to Colorado or something like that and came back with some Coors beer, which was 6%, which was a big deal.
Yeah.
But and then I went on to college, and Minnesota at that time was you had to be 21 to drink. And so we didn't do a whole lot of drinking.
Did you go to the University of Minnesota?
Eventually I did. Yeah,
okay.
I went. And the good news was when I got out of college, I went to college for just 3 years, but I was playing hockey for the University of Minnesota at the time,
Oh, really?
and I got a letter that I could try out with the Boston Bruins National Hockey League, and I was a hell of a skater, and I had a really wicked slap shot, but I really wasn't as big as I should have been or could have been back in the day. But the good news was that I also got a letter of acceptance to the University of Minnesota Medical School at the same time. And so I was agonizing over what to do. I thought, well, I'd love to play hockey, but, and maybe my future is going to be better off if I can go to medical school.
Yeah.
And so after agonizing over a bit, I went, obviously opted to go to medical school, but I can guarantee in my next life, I'm going to give the National Hockey League a run,
Was there a lot of drinking connected to the hockey? Because you just think about that hockey guys, you drink all night, you throw up on your skates, you go out there and you kick some ass.
Oh yeah. We, there was no shortage of drinking and smoking in those days, and other drugs that were going on. But they were a drinking bunch, and they were fighting, and it was great fun at the time. I was 21 years old, 22 years old, so I didn't have to sleep. It was one of those types of deals.
Yeah. Were you taking any kind of uppers or anything?
No, not too much. There were some guys on the group that were taking uppers. They were, they'd come in with a big bowl of them, and it was like a whole bowl of M&Ms. Drugs in those days were easy to get, and uppers and downers and all that stuff. And some of the coaches were handing them out. Some of the guys liked the uppers. I just never did much for me. It made me a little bit squirrely. I didn't have a help in that regard. So, but interesting. Then when I went to medical school, one of the things I think about, and I tell my sponsees about it, is that we had just one lecture on alcoholism in 4 years of medical school. One lecture in 4 years, and we were told at that time that it was a nutritional problem, and that a better diet would certainly help these poor, unfortunate individuals with their alcoholism. Of course, now there's light years more information about it, and that's one of the reasons why we're talking here today.
Now, you're retired after 37 years of being of urology, right? So,
yes, sir. Yeah.
This is what year? You're being told it's attrition.
I retired in December of last year. So I've been retired for a year.
Okay.
And it's been a really good time. The Jimmy Kimmel thing I think was interesting enough. So I got to tell that story because it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
So I got a call from the Jimmy Kimmel show one day, and I hadn't calls like that before. I was on Jimmy Fallon a few years back, and
you were, because your name is, if people were listening, Dr. Dick Chopp. You're a urologist, and you do a lot of, or did a lot of vasectomies.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the show was kind of fun. The lady that called me said, well, there's going to be 3 or 4 people on the show, and it's going to be people whose names befit their professions. The
security guard, I think her name was Robin Banks.
Robin Banks. She was wonderful. She looked like Megan Thee Stallion. I mean, I never forget it. She was a big black lady, and she was pretty and good looking and funny. And then, and of course, Jimmy said, make sure you don't tell your name, until I ask you. And he said, I think, I told him, he said, how many vasectomies have you done? I said, 17,000 or so. And he said, I suspect you would handle a lot of anatomy in that area. I said, well, yes. And he finally said, well, what's your name? I said, Dr. Dick Chopp. So he started laughing, and the camera guy started laughing, I started laughing. It was great fun. He did a hell of a job.
And people want to see it, they could just YouTube Jimmy Kimmel, Dr. Dick Chopp. It's not hard to find, and it is hilarious.
Exactly. So you can't pay for advertising like that.
No, you can't.
It's just the way it works.
Well, you can't pay for advertisement like your name. I mean, clearly you're an extremely bright man. We'll get into some of your credentials, but I mean that's pretty good marketing plan, no? And I'm sure you experienced a lot of success with that.
Well, certainly, the interesting thing was there's about 30 urologists in Austin, and I think I was doing, last time I looked at the numbers, I was doing more vasectomies than 2/3 of all the urologists put together in Austin. So I mean, who wouldn't want to have their vasectomy done by me? That's just the way it works.
You give people a T-shirt that says, or they got right. I was chopped.
I was chopped at the urology team, exactly. Yeah, and so.
And one thing you did, I'd heard about you, working in TV news. I guess you'd started this up, maybe, I don't know. You can tell me how long, but the vasectomy deal over the course of March Madness, right? You would do promotions for guys to come and get a vasectomy. And, it was like $600 for, you get a vasectomy on Wednesday and you can just ride it out through the first couple rounds.
That's exactly right. Yeah, no, we did that. We started doing that, I guess, 15 years ago, probably maybe 18 years ago. And of course they'd come in, they'd get their shirt, and of course the guys would always bring their buddies with them. And sometimes they would, be in the background heckling them while we're so it was great fun. It was really great fun.
So take me back to med school. You're sitting there. They're telling you this is a disease of attrition. What is med school like? Pick it up from there. A lot of drinking involved.
Well, the group that I was with in medical school didn't do much drinking. I was, at least from my own perspective, I was pretty focused on getting through medical school because I knew that if I could do that, I'd probably be in good shape, the rest of my life. And so I didn't want to get off the rails in medical school, and we weren't doing other substances that you can buy over the counter in most states now very much, and so didn't really get exposed to that stuff until I got into my internship and residency, and that was out in LA County General Hospital in 1971. So, in those days, like I said, you could buy that stuff over the counter now.
Yeah.
But I didn't do much drinking in those days because we were using other stuff, and then probably didn't get into the drinking until I got into New York City when I went and did my fellowship at Sloane Kettering, and a great place, wonderful place.
I mean, it's its reputation, speaks for itself.
Yeah.
I mean, when I saw that, just doing research on you, it just like, damn.
Yeah, it was great, and I thought after I had my fellowship, I met my to-be wife there, and she was doing a fellowship in scoliosis or curvature of the spine, and so my wife and I moved to Austin in July of '83. And an interesting story at the time was we were driving down the freeway, and one of my buddies was driving us, and he had an open can of beer on the dash. And I said, Mike, take that away. I said, we're gonna get stopped. He said, oh no, he says, open bottle is fine in Texas. And I thought, wow, this is a great state. I've come to the right place. And in Minnesota, you couldn't do that. You never could do that all the time I was growing up. And of course, rightfully so, that was changed not too long afterwards. But so I'm in Austin and I'm flying high and everything is good. And I thought, I really.
So you're experiencing a lot of success. I mean, your credentials, we just went through them, speak for themselves. And you inferred you were smoking a little bit of weed, right? I don't want to say anything out of school.
Yeah, a little bit. Oh yeah.
Just here and there, but nothing crazy. And so you're kind of hitting it down the fairway.
Yeah, I mean, I thought about it, and I thought, I can't miss. I've got all these credentials, and I've got all this extra training. I'm obviously the smartest guy in the room. I've got a good-looking wife, and she's doing great things, and so, we're rolling. I mean, it's 1983, and I figured, I'm going to have so much success. I don't know what I'm going to do with it all. I'm going to have a nice house, and I'm going to have a nice car or 6. And maybe I'm going to have an airplane or 2, and maybe I'll get some horses.
Yeah.
Those were things that were all out in front of me, and I thought, it's gonna be wonderful, So, but what happened is now it's 1993. I've been in Austin for 10 years, and work wasn't all that much fun, and it was becoming drill, and I was doing the same thing day after day, and even though I was trying to bring new things to Austin, Texas, it was still got to be a little bit boring after a time, and my wife wasn't behaving correctly. I, started drinking intermittently on the way home from work, and the people around me were behaving badly. The nurses weren't respecting me the way I thought they should. People in the bank weren't behaving correctly, and all of a sudden, it seemed to me I'm divorced after 17 years of marriage in 1998, and I'm looking at myself thinking, what went wrong? What went wrong? I was angry. I was resentful. My wife had an affair, and I was 90% sure it was all her fault. And unfortunately, she was killed in a car accident a month before 9/11. But
Wow.
it was a really bitter pill for me to swallow, learning that once I'd been in AA for a couple of years, that the 90% fault was mine and it wasn't hers. And that's a tough thing, I think, for alcoholics to accept, that, I was such a self-centered, self-absorbed, probably an asshole from time to time, that, no wonder that she divorced me. And so that was a tough one. That was a tough one for me. But it was a result of being in the program, and that was freeing ultimately to understand what I was doing when I was drinking. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever get a chance to make amends? I'm assuming no.
Well, I did make amends, and obviously not personally, I couldn't, but part of the program is the amends, and there's no doubt that I had to write a letter to her and make an amends to her, and huge thing for me, huge things for my kids, and I have to make amends to my kids. A lot of people make amends too, as you know, and but we must do it because it's freeing. It's freeing. Yeah.
Yeah, that pain can, that's for me, it was a new thing to experience emotional pain. And whether it's gearing up to make an amends or whether you're unable to make one personally and you've got to make one a different way, the freedom on the other side of that pain it's just esteemable. I never thought I would experience actually working through, this is just me, working through something that was hard, being sober. And the first time you do it, I was able to build on that. And then all of a sudden I'm feeling better about myself. It's,
yeah. And, building on what you just said, is not only is it monumental the first time you go through, the 12-step program and you get into step 4 and 5, but more importantly, that we continue to do it, because the way you and I are built, people around us are gonna anger us, and we're gonna have some resentment, and we have to keep doing that stuff. We have to keep doing it, and that's the key. We can't ride on the wave and just hope that it's going to be for good forever and ever, and unless we keep working on it, I think.
Was it? First of all, you're exactly right, because just from a mental health perspective, right, I owe it to the people around me to go to meetings, because that'll enable me to communicate and just, you can tolerate me, and I'm more tolerant.
Yeah.
It's magical, and at the end of the day, I don't get drunk, and maybe die, which is the end game. But back to you and your story, you're doing so well. How the hell do you get? Do you get sober? Because I got to imagine somebody with your level of success and, like you mentioned, ego, it's got to be something, I don't know, something prolific that triggers this whole deal, the sobriety thing.
Yeah. So, the issue that you and I had is the fact that we couldn't stop drinking, even though we really wanted to do so. How many times did you say, and I said, Monday morning, that's it.
Yeah.
I'm stopping. And we really meant it. And, but, we just didn't see a good way out of the mess. And so I talked to my groups a little bit about what I think is called the turning point. And for me, I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a Wednesday morning, and I was halfway to work, at 7:00. And I stopped, and I thought, I'm going to call in sick today, and I'm going to go back and keep drinking. And then I'll go to work tomorrow. Well, what happened was that Thursday, the same thing happened. Friday, the same thing happened. And then Saturday morning came the day, and my office manager, my senior partner showed up at my house, 10 o'clock in the morning. I thought, how rude of them to come in and interrupt my drink,
Yeah.
But they suggested to me that I go to treatment. And they suggested to me that if I didn't go to treatment, I might lose my job. And they suggested that if I didn't go to treatment, I might lose my wife. And they suggested that if I didn't go to treatment, I might lose my medical license. And so next thing I know, I'm on my way to Talbot Recovery Center, Atlanta. And I think some people call that an intervention, but that's exactly what it was,
Yeah.
And I don't know if you know much about Talbot, but it was an interesting spot. It was started in about 1993 or so. And he, Dr. Talbot, was a physician. He ended up living under a bridge.
Is his name Matt Talbot?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So there's Talbot Retreats. I've heard of those.
Yeah, Talbot Recovery Center, exactly, in Atlanta.
Okay.
And
he lived under a bridge?
He did before. I mean, he got, he got a lot lower than I ever did. And I guess my lowest spot was the fact that I had to be, intervened to take to Atlanta. But I remember, having some, I think we call moments of grace. And people who have been through this program, and I think you've probably had some of these, and think about this for a second. So, moment of grace, I think if we look it up, it's called unmerited divine assistance given to the human condition for their regeneration. So I think my first moment of grace was.
Can you repeat that one more time?
Moments of grace. So unmerited, divine, unmerited is the key, meaning not deserved. An unmerited divine assistance given to the human for their regeneration of their soul.
Okay. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So the first one for me was when I was being driven away from my house on my way to the airport to go to Atlanta, in that giant hole that you and I had in our stomach that could only be subdued with alcohol went away, and it never came back. That was a huge moment for me. And my second moment of grace was when I had been in Atlanta for about 10 days. And the gentleman who ran our group was a great guy by the name of Woody Roberts. He was an Episcopal priest who was on loan to Atlanta and has still been there for 15 years. So as you can imagine, there was about 8 or 10 of us in our group that went through, and guys would come in like me, and then other guys would depart. And so every 10 days or 2 weeks, Woody would say, all right, guys, sit down and give us a brief synopsis about why you're here. And so Woody's across the table from me, and there's a few guys on my right and a few guys on my left, and the guys on my right started, and the first guy said, he talked about his DWIs and he lost a job, etc. And I thought, in my judgmental mode, I said, it's a good thing you're here. Yeah. And next guy talked about, beating his wife and ended up in jail and being in a car wreck and all that. And I thought, Jesus, you should have been here 6 months ago, And so it goes around the table, and finally it comes to me, and everybody's looking at me. And it was like a blinding light, man. It just hit me. I said, Jesus, I am one. I deserve a seat in this room.
You're in the group.
I'm in the group. And I went to Woody afterwards, and I said, Woody, I had a moment of revelation in there. I said, I tell you what, I'm going to get this right the first time, because I said, I'm not coming back. He said, Rick, he said, I kind of knew that about you. He said, welcome. I'm sure you got it. But the third part, which I think was the most important part, my third moment of grace was when I got back to Austin after being in Talbot for 3.5 months.
Oh, 3.5 months.
3.5 months, yeah. Now I'll touch on that just in a minute. But
yeah, that's awesome.
I got back to Austin. There was still something about the whole business I didn't understand. I thought, I'm kind of a smart guy. Why couldn't I do this on my own, or why don't I understand it better? And so when I got back with my sponsor, Charlie Parker, he said, "Did anybody ever write you to draw for you the vicious circle?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, here's how it goes." He said, "All right." He said, and we're gonna have to do this kind of on the air, but he said,
"Yeah,
the circle shows on the right at about 3:00 position." He says, "Is your first drink." He says, "Write that down." So I did. He says, "Then draw an arrow down." He says, "And that's your allergy to alcohol." And the allergy to alcohol gets manifested as what we call craving. I said, "Yeah, I read it. I understand the craving." He said, "Yeah." He said, "That's what distinguishes us from the non-alcoholics. When you and I start to drink, we don't know if we're going to stop at 1 drink or we're going to stop at 16 drinks. We don't know if we're going to stop this afternoon, and we don't know if we're going to stop until next Wednesday." He says, "You and I have that problem." He says, "My wife," he says, "can have a half a glass of wine." He says, "And walk away from it, and touch it, and not have another glass of wine for 2 months." He says, "You and I," he says, "would drink our wine. We would drink her wine, and anybody else's wine that happens to be on the table."
Yeah.
He says, and that's the thing that makes us different from the average bear out there. And then we go along at the bottom of the circle, and we have to stop. And that's at the 9:00 position on the circle. And we have to stop because we have to go to work. We have to stop because our spouse says to us, "If you don't stop, I'm going to divorce your sorry ass." We stop because we're in jail. We stop because we got a DWI, whatever. And that part, he says, is actually pretty easy. And I'm thinking, well, I don't know. It wasn't easy for me the first time. But the real problem that we have is alcoholics is in the top part of the circle. And that's that business where we get restless and irritable and discontent. And restless, I think, means that you want to be anywhere but where you are. And irritable is, you're surrounded by idiots. It's the bozos in the line at Starbucks, and it's the jerk in the line at the bank. And discontent means that you want to be anywhere but where you are. We'd like to get another job in another city that'll take care of the problem. And unfortunately for you and me, Pete, you know this, that's where we have all the problems in the top part of that circle. And people, I think the best example of that is I heard, it's kind of like having a spring inside of us, and it keeps getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And the only way we can get some relief is to drink. And all of a sudden we're back at the 3:00 position. We're going round and round that circle. And I thought, Jesus, that's me. That is me. Finally, somebody explained it to me. And the good news is, of course, as we know, that if we have some type of a spiritual change or a psychic revolution or whatever you want to call it, that you can interdict that circle and prevent that from happening. So that was a huge, huge moment of grace for me.
There's an understanding that comes with that, and then there's a relief with that, right?
Oh, tremendous. Yeah. I mean, at least I understood what the problem was and why I couldn't stop on my own, and why this program, 12 Steps, gives us a toolkit that you and I can use to deal with the issues that we have every day. Another interesting story, and I talk about this to my groups as well, is that I said, what is it that sustains me now? And the thing that sustains me is having sponsees, taking guys in who are struggling, and sometimes they're brand new and sometimes they've been in the program for a while. And the interesting part of it was I got most of my sponsees from my practice when I was still actively working. And and so anytime I have a new patient come in, most of my patients were guys, I would always ask them as a rule, I said, do you smoke? And do you drink? And I'd hear such things as, well, not every day. And, or, I haven't had a drink in 3 days.
Is that a red? That's a red. I know that's a red flag.
Yeah, big red flag coming up. So, but, as soon as I hear stuff like that, I would offer to them the fact that, that I've been in the program for 10 years or 15 years at that point. And of course, then they would really open up. And that's where I got most of my sponsees. It was interesting.
That's awesome. What about the 3.5 months? What did that do for you, that long-term recovery? Because for me, I went to, just so I went to rehab, and then it was suggested I go somewhere else, like a sober living or a halfway house, if you want, sober living, if you want to dress it up. And it was about 4 months of being, or 5 months of being, quote unquote, institutionalized. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me in my life.
Absolutely. Well, it reminds me of the story, but when I was at Talbot, nobody really knew at the time how much one must spend at a treatment center. Do you go for a week? Do you go for 3 weeks? Do you go for 2 months? Do you go for 6 months? And so they started looking at their data for the past 10 years. And it was an interesting thing that came out is that the sobriety rate for the people at Talbot, and most of them were docs in the original MDs in the original series, the sobriety rate at the end of the year, if they had been there for 30 days, was about 45%. Not really great. The sobriety rate for the people who had been there 3 months plus was in excess of 95%.
Wow.
So something happens. Something happens that, it appears that during that time, if you can adhere to the program, it gives you a better chance at retaining your sobriety. Now, you and I both know that a one-time immersion in a place like Talbot is going to help you, but without going forward and staying in the program, you probably don't have a great chance of keeping it up year after year after year.
Yeah.
Certainly don't have an opportunity to have this discussion that you and I are having right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you change as a person? Because going back to where you said you were egotistical, and you had, you don't want to say somebody's got a reason for a big ego, but you had a lot of stuff to puff out your chest about. And so now you get sober. How was your relationship with your patients, people you worked with, different?
Well, it brings me up a little story about when I came back. We were working at one of the hospitals, and one morning there was a bunch of nursing students there, and the nursing supervisor came up and she said, "Dr. Chopp," she said, "would you take Isabel here and bring her with you in the morning and teach her how to scrub and take her into the surgery, and all that?" And I said, "Happy to do it, And so she came with me, and we taught her how to scrub and how to put on a mask, etc., and took her into surgery and everything.
And scrubbing, for people that don't know, is just getting ready for surgery, right? Like getting dressed.
Ready for surgery, washing your hands, getting all dressed, and having all the right things on and everything. And so at the end of the deal, and I heard this secondhand later. Isabel went back to her nursing supervisor and said, she said, "Dr. Chopp was so nice to me. He was so patient with me, and he explained this to me, and he never raised his voice. And, I didn't make any mistakes according to him, and it was just such a great experience." And the nursing supervisor, who had known me for a while, said, "Well, that's good, because he wasn't always that way." So I thought that was really telling, But I think the business about staying in the program, I think now gives me what I call some spiritual insulation, and by that I mean I think it gives us help to deal with the problems that we all have, alcoholics or not. People can be abrasive, and before I would have eaten them, and now it gives me some room to kind of stay away from them and to deal with it without getting crazy. I think we need to try to be the least disturbed person in the room instead of the most disturbed person that we used to be. And I think the other thing is that our job, I think, is to make it easier for others to love us. And
For others to love us.
Others to love us, yeah. And my wife tells me 3 times a week how happy she is that I'm sober. And so that's great. And also, I think that, to your point, the other thing that's happened to me is my time frame has been somewhat contracted. And by that I mean, I don't worry so much about the issues that happened last week and the people that jumped on me last week. I still get some resentment from time to time, but not nearly. I don't ride them like I used to, week after week. And also, I don't worry so much about the future, and I'm not so into fear about what's going to happen if I run out of money next week, or if this happens next week or that happens next week. I think what it does, it tends to keep me more in the day and think about the good things that are happening to me today, and this is one of them. And if I'm really tuned in, and I've seen a couple of sponsees, I can actually get into the moment more than I used to. So I think the ultimate thing is that, the treatment for alcoholism is not sobriety. That's a tough one for people to understand. The treatment is spirituality, and that's the key, I think.
What was your spiritual foundation before you got sober?
Oh, probably not very good. People ask me when I give these talks at the treatment centers to talk about what's the difference between spirituality and religion. And I tell them up front, I said, listen, I said, you must understand that religion has sustained people for centuries. And whether you're Christian or Judaism or Islam or Buddhist, I said, religion has done wonders for many, many, many people. Religion, I went to Catholic school when I grew up, and I didn't eat meat on
Me
Friday,
too.
and went to confession and all that other business. And but religion, I think, is something we get from the outside, as versus spirituality, which I think is something that we get more from the inside. And people, I think, who are practice and try to be spiritual or achieve some level of spirituality kind of have 2 threads. They have a capacity to have some relationship with their sacred being, whether it's God or the universe or a higher power. I think they have a capacity to feel loved. And the second part of it is that they, I think, try to share this with others. And so spirituality sometimes can be a nebulous thing to talk about, but in a short span of time, I think that's the difference for me.
Would you say that because you had a reputation like of, maybe people that were close to you, maybe, and that weren't that close, they may have not known about the seriousness of your alcohol problem, but clearly you go away for 3.5 months, there's an intervention, you've got some work to do to restore your reputation. Would you say that recovery, 12 steps, that was pretty much the only way out of that? Because if somebody thinks about that, okay, I'm going to come out of this 3.5 month stint and I'm just going to get back, go back to work. And that's got to be terrifying because, I had the gift of desperation. So I everybody knew I had a problem.
Yeah.
I was at the bottom, but you were still, you walked back into this job where people know who you are. You've got a reputation within the community, I'm sure, regionally, and also your urology community.
Yeah. So we think that nobody knows about our drinking.
Is that so? That's what you thought. You thought you kind of had it.
Yeah, I thought nobody knows about it, but of course my neighbors who saw me out there with a garden hose in one hand and the bottle of vodka in the other, they probably knew about it. and I'm sure that the people at work who saw me shaky in the morning, stuff like that, they probably knew about it. And but the interesting thing that struck me so much when I got back is I thought, to your point, I thought, man, I'm gonna have to be careful so that none of my patients know about that I'm in recovery, and that da-da-da-da-da. And so I remember going to one of my first few meetings, and there were 3 or 4 of my patients there, And they came up to me and said, "Hey, Doc, how you doing, man? Glad to see you. I'm glad you're here." And then they walked off, and I thought, Jesus, isn't this great? They're happy that I'm here. Everything's good. They didn't give me any grief. They didn't say, I'm glad you're here, because you needed to be here. It was just wonderful. So that kind of was a really freeing moment. And from that moment on, it was a matter of, I didn't worry so much about if people saw me at a meeting or if people talked to me about alcoholism and all that. So
Was that the moment where you kind of were able to open up? Because what you do is important. You speak at treatment centers. You're somebody who people listen to. You're articulate. You have a great message that you carry. What was that the moment when you were, you see patients in meetings, and you see the positive reaction? Was that the moment where you say, "Hey, I'm fine with coming out about this"?
Oh, sure, certainly, yeah. No, that was a pivotal moment for me, and from that moment forward, I just didn't have any problem telling people about what I was doing. I didn't stand on the street corner and jump up and down and tell people about it. But certainly, if it came up in a discussion, or if it came up in the office, I had no problem talking about it. And more often than not, once I started talking about it, that's when people really opened up to me about their problems.
Yeah, me too. I mean, that's the same thing.
Yeah.
I always say, I don't bang, big books over people's head, but if we get there somehow in the conversation, or if you get close to me at all, this is something that eventually is going to come up. Certainly.
And hopefully. Yeah.
And for people that are listening that aren't sure about how it will be received, what we just heard from Dr. Chopp, and from what I've experienced, all the fear, right? They're going to, when you get sober, people are going to receive me differently now that I'm sober, or, my career, my relationships are going to fall apart. I'm going to be judged. That, to me, and I can't think, I'm sure it's happened once or twice, but not that I can remember have I received a negative response from anyone when I've told them about being sober. So that's all BS.
Yep, I agree. And the other thing is that, and I think, you and I have both experienced this, Pete, but the fact that people can put the 12-step issue on hold while they think they want to get the rest of their life together.
Yeah.
And I think that, a lot of 12-steppers, they settle for mere sobriety instead of a real transformation, of the self. And I think we need to understand the 12-step program is not a worthiness contest. It is something that will make the rest of our lives wonderful. And so I tell my sponsees, you got to make sure that your sobriety is tight and that you're doing the program, because then all the rest of the stuff in your life will get better. Your job will get better, your relationship with your wife, your relationship with your kids, all that stuff will be better as a consequence of you doing the program and not the other way around.
And my brother go ahead. That's what?
No, I think that's important for folks to understand, that we've got to do this part first, and then the rest of it will fall in line.
I mean, that is it. And we got to keep doing it. My brother called me the other day. I mentioned he's sober for a long time, about as long as you. And he said, don't let the gifts of sobriety get in the way of the gifts of sobriety. And I told him that years ago, because my sponsor, Steve, told me that. And he said, and it was just one of those things where, and that's it. Like, you can't let stuff that happens to you, or we suggest you don't, right? That the stuff that happens to you along positive things get in the way of your program, because that is the only way for me to stay fulfilled. Anything I put in front of that, I'm going to lose. I've got a history of that.
Yeah. And I tell my sponsees, I said, you don't have to beat the drum every day in the 12-step program, but what we don't want to do is we don't want to coast, and we don't want to go weeks and weeks without going to a meeting, or weeks and weeks without talking to your sponsor, that type of thing, because that way, Mark Houston was one we talked about a little bit earlier. He said, he says, I don't care how long you've been in the program. He says, if you take an alcoholic and put enough dis-ease before them, enough dis-ease, they will drink. And so, whether you're in the program a year, whether you're in 15 years, if you get in the ditch and you're not doing the deal, you have a potential to pick up that drink again. Because then, and when you ask somebody when they do, why they do that, they, to a man, they say, I don't know. It just happened, So I have to do it as often as I can, and taking care of sponsees keeps me in it, because I have to stay in front of those knotheads from time to time, and they ask me questions that I don't know, so I have to go ask my sponsor.
What do you feel about the fact that you are, esteemed professionally as far as your ability to carry the message? I mean, I gotta imagine that really helps people you're working with, because, hey, like we talked about at the very beginning of this thing, alcoholism is the great equalizer. I've been lucky enough to talk to people like you. I've talked to other doctors. I've talked to pro athletes, super agents, and they've all got it too. I mean, and they had every reason not to do it, and certainly to get sober long before they did, but it just didn't happen, and it's got to be great for you. I guess it's a long way of me saying it's just got to be great for you to carry the message.
Yeah. And so, you touched on it right away early on in our talk today, is the fact that it affects everybody. And if I can, lead, carry some credence and carry some weight into this as a professional, then so be it. My story hopefully is not going to be terribly different from somebody who does something else. But I think sometimes folks will look at me and say, well, if he can do it, certainly I can do it, because he's done the things that need to be done. And if I do what he's done, then perhaps I'm going to have the tools in this program to stay sober and to have a good life. And so, yes, the fruits of this business is not only for me, but it's all the people around me. And that's the key.
Well, and as we get closer to wrapping up, I'll let you out here in a couple minutes. I want to just go back to, because this is something I'm curious about, and for people listening to this that aren't sure, if they can stop or if they ever will. When that intervention happens, can you describe, what made you or the situation that made you say yes, right? Because clearly people had told you needed to stop before. I'm assuming actually, but that intervention that day, you made a decision. How did that happen?
Well, I tell folks that my decision was coerced, and so, but and not to make light of that, but
no, I mean we can make light of it because we're sober. But I hear you. Yeah.
But during that moment, I remember sitting there after having talked to my office manager and my senior partner. I thought, maybe this was another moment of grace. Maybe I thought I need to do something else, because what I'm doing is not getting me to where I want to be. And so at that moment, I became open to trying something different. I didn't know if it was going to work, and but what I was doing wasn't doing the deal. And so I think if folks can be open to trying a new approach and a new avenue, there's a strong chance that it's going to work for them. We hear people all the time saying, "Well, AA didn't work. I tried AA and it didn't work, and I'm drinking again." And in defense of that, I think that there are some people who are probably not alcoholics, and they may be binge drinkers, and for them maybe AA is not the deal. But it's been my experience that the great majority of folks who will put in the time and have a sponsor, I think that's important. I really do. I really think you need a sponsor. At least I did. That if you will do that and really put your heart and soul into it for a period of time, that your chances of remaining sober and having a spiritual experience go up and up and up. it doesn't happen for everybody. And I don't think even Bill Wilson, if he were sitting here right now with us, would say, yeah, this is the answer for every alcoholic who ever walked or talked. Yeah. I agree.
But just like you, it really, really worked for me. Where did you find the willingness to stay and the humility to stay in treatment for 3.5 months?
I think, again, it was the fact that I was going to do it right the first time, and I was going to give it 100% chance of seeing if it was going to do right before I, pronounce judgment about whether I did the right thing or not. I thought, I'm going to give this a whirl. I'm going to give it my best shot. That's my personality. I got really good at drinking. And I thought, I got really good at playing hockey. And I like to be really good at what I do. And I thought, I'm going to give this my best shot. And I'm going to really see if I can't get good at that. And the rest is history. I mean, it's changed my life. It's been the best 15 years of my life, Pete. I couldn't have asked anything better in the past 15 years than what I've had to date.
I love it. But the last question for you, what do you tell the person? I like to ask pretty much everybody this. What do you tell the person who's struggling to get a day? And like you said, the person who's coming in like you and I did and says, I want to stop today, but they can't.
Yeah. That's a difficult thing. And you hear it in the meetings all the time, just don't drink today and just don't drink today. For me and for my sponsees, I think to do that all on your own is tough. And for me, it would have been insurmountable because, you and I both said 100 times or 1,000 times, this is it. Today's the last day. And I think without some help, it's tough for most people to do that. There's a lady that both you and I know who was able to do that all on her own. And I was floored when I heard that because I thought, boy, that is not the norm.
Yeah.
That is not the norm. Most people can't do it on their own. So I think I recommend to those folks that they get some help and go to a meeting, get a sponsor. Go to a meeting, get a sponsor, because if I think that we have to have somebody to be able to bounce this stuff off, and to do it all on our own is a tough one. And I think most of us just don't have the wherewithal to do it. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Chopp, thank you for helping us do it, together and not alone today. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate the time and the message.
Yeah, it was wonderful, Pete. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you got it. And this, just so you know, we'll put this up on Thursday, and I'll make sure I send you the link.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, and I want to meet you in person.
Yeah, I hope to see you around campus. Let's make it happen. I can't thank you enough.
All right, sir.
All right, Dr. Chopp. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening to The Payoff with Pete. Once again, I'm Pete Souza. And of course, we are part of the Rogue Media Network. All kinds of good podcasts you can find at roguemedianetwork.com. And of course, you can find this podcast and all those other ones wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, other spots like that.
This has been a Rogue Media podcast.